Hey guys, it's Emmanuel Manning, another video. Hope you guys are doing well. So wanted to first thank, all the positive support that I've been getting on the last few videos, comments and the likes, and then a lot of the shout outs from other members of the comic book community. So, definitely want to welcome everybody and, including new subscribers, perhaps educators and, just the general public. So, again, I want to really thank everybody for that support. Really, really does help out. Yeah, so let's get started with our current video. So I wanted to kind of mix two of my passions, right? Teaching and then comic books / manga. So I want to talk a little bit about comics and manga in the classroom. This is my experience, right? Things that I've done to perfect the lessons and incorporate it in a way that's thoughtful, right? And best serves my students. So yeah, let's get started. First, I want to talk a little bit about my background. Okay, so as a comic book collector, I've been a collector and reader since the 1990s. Okay, I think the Spider-Man, X-Men, and Batman animated series, they were a big influence on my collecting. So, I saw those animated shows and right away I kind of wanted the comics to go with it. I was very focused a lot on like first appearances, Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and then X-Men, right? The Uncanny X-Men run, and then for Batman, Nightfall, etc., right? And a lot of first appearances, right? Yes, I was one of those speculators, right? Hoarding all those first appearances, right? To see if I can get rich later on. But also a reader too. I really enjoy these stories, right? Not just for like speculation value. In terms of anime and manga, not a big anime and manga guy, actually. I dabbled in anime during the 90s, Dragon Ball Z. But not a lot. But during the last 6 years, I've been reading some manga here and there. Mostly Junji Ito horror text, right? Been finding some of it kind of fits within the goals of my classroom, right? So that's why I've been kind of, trying to read a little bit more up on it, right? And I can see a lot of my students are interested in it. So I've been kind of like, one of the reasons I also been dabbling in it as well. But 100%, right? Comic books are my big passion. In terms as an educator, so over 6 years, right, I've been working as a developmental reading and writing instructor within the City University of New York. So I've been teaching now manga and comic books now for the last 6 years, right? The first 2 years, I was kind of doing experimental, in terms of some workshops, right? Small group of students as a choice assignment, right? Really want to make sure it kind of fits, right? And kind of seeing student interest and engagement in it, right? So why comic books, right? Why comic books? I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on that. So I do not teach comic book to push the hobby on my students. Okay, so that's very important, right? I like comic books. My students don't have to like comic books, right? And I don't want them, I'm a collector, they have to be a collector, right? So that's very important, right? As an educator, right? My goal is always my students' education, right? And our curriculum, right? As teachers, right? Educators, we have a certain curriculum, right? And I want to be always be faithful to those goals of the curriculum, right? So, as I was pondering using comic books, there's a lot of skills in the curriculum that I have to hit, right? I'm given certain texts, but I have some flexibility in using certain texts. So summarizing, paraphrasing, analyzing, asking questions, making predictions. Guess what? Those skills, students can practice those skills through manga text, right? And comic book text, right? So they kind of fit within the program that I work with. The student engagement I noticed was very high when I was trying it out many years ago. A lot of students were telling me, Mister, why aren't we doing more of this, right? So that's another reason I saw the engagement was high. So that's always a good thing as an educator, is an engagement, right? You see your students, working on something, working on their skills, but something that they're interested in. Especially want to introduce many of these texts as choice assignments, where I give them kind of different manga and comic book texts for them to select. Also, manga and comic books, I know that it's a visual storytelling format, but it's a story, right? There's characters, there's things, there's plot, there's a beginning, middle, and end, right? There's an author, there's some serious topics, right? Especially in graphic novels and manga, right? That can be analyzed, right? So, even though it's a visual form, I remind my students it's still a genre, right? It's just a fiction genre, right? Horror, right? Etc. But it can still be investigated, right? And analyzed. And then one of the things I've noticed with some of the texts that I've used, they're a little bit shorter than many texts in our curriculum. Some of the texts are very, very long. So, students can kind of read these, right? It's not too overwhelming for them. Okay. And then it allows for more unpacking, right? Unpacking in my classroom means that we get to analyze it, talk a lot about it, like deeper, going to deeper, right? And my students are like, Mister, you want us to go deeper? Yeah, I want us to go deeper, right? I want to get into the author's head and analyze these themes, right? So that allows for more kind of conversation, right? Where my students are not overwhelmed in the process of reading it, and we could talk a lot about the text a little bit later on. And then there's some concepts that are pretty abstract, like symbolism, metaphors, right? So I found sometimes when students can kind of see it as well, it kind of helps me use the manga as a way to jumpstart other lessons, right? So, it's more concrete. They can kind of see these terms like symbolism, okay? And then it kind of helps me with my other lessons, right? That don't involve comic books and manga, okay? And then, to be honest, one of my implicit goals, I try to give my students like a piece of a book, meaning like it's a 4-part story, 5-part. I give them like the first part, maybe the second part. And to be honest, I'm kind of sneaky. I want them to look out for the rest of the text, right? I want them to read a lot more, not just like get used to like, oh, teachers, I have to read this for this person, for this teacher, right? So that's kind of one of my implicit goals, for them to kind of seek more text and read on their own. All right, so I want to give a few examples of some text that I've used. Okay, but I did want to kind of give an overview, right? There's people, some might be some educators. So, I'll get to the examples. So a lot of the lessons are structured with some background for some of the readings, right? So maybe some background on the setting or the author. Okay, so that's something that I kind of provide for certain texts. I don't think all of them I have to provide, but at least I get to know a little bit of the context, or maybe the author. And I do sometimes like a quick model reading to get used to a little bit of the paneling, the format of comic books, right? Most students are familiar with it, right? But I'm kind of a teacher. I don't assume everybody's familiar with a comic book and the paneling. So we talk a little bit about the thought bubbles, the paneling, right? And I read like 1 or 2 pages. We start talking about it before I let them read. Okay. A lot of students, they read the text during computer lab, right? They take notes. Okay. I invite them to have a conversation with the reading. Okay, maybe map out different characters, what's happening, right? What are their thoughts, how do etc., right? I just want them to kind of really take in the text. A lot of times students will start a reading assignment, a writing assignment in class with coaching, right? And which is a educator term, right? Where students are working closely, but then, teachers kind of walking around and helping them, right? Not giving them answers, right? But just like giving them, quick feedback, right? And then they make those changes, okay? And then if I think it's deemed necessary, right, their reading responses, I kind of make them revise it, just because I like this idea of revision, right? I think it's a form of learning. And then, it invites students to go back to the text, right, if they miss something. So, this is a very general outline, right, of some of the lessons. But, I just want to go over that in case there's any educators who, are interested in this. Okay, I want to give a few examples. Okay, so Gideon Falls, right? So for this text, right, some students, they practice some of the summarizing, analyzing with this text, but symbolism is something that I ask students about in this text, right? This is how the text starts, with the main character being upside down, right? So after they've read the text, and I ask them, why did the author decide to give us this image of the character upside down, right? And we can kind of see in the text, right, the way he sees things, right? He doesn't live like in the same world as others, the way he sees it, right? So, that invites for analysis itself. The way the color red is used in the story, right, in Gideon Falls. I ask students about that, right, that symbolism. What does the red might represent? Again, it invites students to think and invites a nice conversation. Okay, Blue Marvel. Okay, Marvel. Here we talk about race, right? I let students talk about race, right? I know race is a topic that's a lot of debate about it. It's a hot topic. I let students kind of come to conclusions, right, on this text, right? In this text, students practice some summarizing skills. They ask questions, right, making some predictions, examine the ending, okay? And then they can add their opinion and analysis on race, right? Again, I try not to incorporate my beliefs. I want to see what students think, right? How does this character, they would have handled the situation differently, the ending, right? So again, right, inviting that student voice into their papers, right? And then Miss Marvel. Okay, so Miss Marvel is another text that I found useful. Again, students are practicing some key skills, summarizing. Another cultural perspective, right, is mentioned, right, is very prominent in the story. Assimilation, identity, coming of age, what it really means to be a hero, analyzing quotes. So again, these are some of the skills, sometimes not all of these, right? It depends on the unit that I'm working on that students practice with Miss Marvel, right? Very high engagement with Miss Marvel. We also look at some manga, right? As I mentioned, right? Manga, especially Junji Ito, right? We look at some horror manga, right? So Junji Ito, it's, some students are kind of there. It's like, oh my God, that's so cool. We're doing horror in the classroom. But some of Junji Ito's manga has a lot of like these deeper tones and messages. Okay, so, I found his text to be useful. And we look at things like, like Library of Illusions is the text. We look at horror, right, as a genre. Childhood trauma, right? They summarize, they connect this to another text, right? We analyze some mental health issues, right? This trauma, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? We have conversations about that. How can we help? How this character who suffers this condition, what could have been done to better help them, right? So again, it's a little bit of a problem solution aspect. I asked students to kind of work on for this text. Kill to be killed, right? This is a text that has some violence to begin with, but we talk about being a vigilante, feeling powerless, right? Suicide, depression, these are topics that come up. Feeling alienated from your society. And then they work on other skills, summarizing, making predictions, and asking questions, right? Very, very high engagement with this text. Kill to be killed. Shortcomings, right? They write a final paper, right? 6-paragraph essay, and they do a character analysis. Did these characters come of age? Their analysis has to be supported with evidence from the text, right? They analyze relationships. And this is a very, very high engagement in my classroom, right? And debates too, because I ask the students, did they come of age? So I leave it up to them. Did these characters mentally mature? And there's a nice debate. Did they come of age, not come of age, partially, right? So I like that invitation, right, for students to kind of give their own interpretation, okay? And then here's some of my concluding thoughts. So overall, I've had some success with using comics and manga in the classroom. I feel like students are getting great practice in those skills, right? Those key curriculum skills as part of my program. And many of the students ask me for more of the chapters. They seek the rest of the text of their own, right? Sometimes I've kind of have extra copies of the text, and then students borrow them, right? It's like a library at times. Okay. I found that origin stories like Miss Marvel, Blue Marvel in terms of comic books, I've found those to be more useful in terms of self-contained stories, right? There's not like, unfortunately, like those in comic books these days, there's like these long storylines, and then you have to read like so many comic books to understand what's happening in the current story. So yeah, those stories are, that sometimes is off-putting to students. So I don't use those, right? So a lot of times self-contained graphic novels, origin stories, and a lot of the manga and they seem to be very popular with the students as well, right? So, and then most students, I noticed they like the Junji Ito horror text. It's weird. I was like, man, I'm teaching horror. I was like, I even talked to my professional developer, and I found it to be very engaging, right? Students are very engaged with the horror text, right? And then I think overall, any educator, anybody who's considering using, I think as long as the lesson preparation is thoughtful, you investigate, you look at these texts, they fit with your curriculum and larger goals, learning goals for the classroom, I would say go for it. Okay. And I think that is it. Okay. So, I know that was a little bit of a long video, but hopefully, you found that informative and helpful. And, let me know if you have any comments or questions. Okay. If anybody's interested in more about some of the lesson ideas that I mentioned, definitely let me know. And as always, please, consider liking, leaving a comment, and, I thank you, for your time. All right. So I am out. Be well.